The wagon had been sitting at the edge of Thomas Crane's property for 3 days before he decided to walk down and see what business a man had parking that close to another man's fence without asking. It wasn't the wagon that bothered him, it was the silence around it. No campfire smoke, no voices, no movement at all except the slow turn of a wheel when the wind caught it right. Thomas was 52 years old, and he'd learned long ago that silence in the West wasn't peaceful, it was a warning. He saddled his roan mare and rode the quarter-mile down to the cottonwood grove where the wagon sat, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the trees. The wagon was old, patched with mismatched wood, its canvas cover torn and stained. 2 mules stood tethered nearby, their ribs showing, heads low. They didn't even look up when Thomas approached. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near the rifle. "Anyone here?" No answer. He stepped closer. The back flap of the wagon hung open, swaying slightly. Inside, he could see blankets piled in a heap, a few tin plates, a water barrel tipped on its side. The smell hit him then, sweat, rot, something sour and human. "I'm armed," Thomas called out, louder this time. "If you're hurt, say so. If you're looking for trouble, you picked the wrong fence." Still nothing. He circled the wagon, checking the ground. Boot prints, several sets leading off toward the creek, fresh enough. He followed them, rifle raised now, his heartbeat steady but alert. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on a flat rock near the water, her back to him, knees pulled up to her chest. She wore a torn dress that might have been blue once, but now it was the color of dust and blood. Her hair hung in dark tangles over her shoulders. She didn't turn when he approached, didn't flinch at the sound of his boots on the stones. "Miss." She didn't move. Thomas stopped a few feet away, lowering the rifle slightly. "Miss, are you hurt?" Her voice came out quiet, flat. "They're dead." Thomas felt the words settle in his chest like a stone. He glanced around the clearing, saw nothing but trees and water. "Who's dead?" "All of them." He took a step closer. Now he could see her hands, scraped raw dirt under the nails, something darker on her wrists. Bruises, old and new. Her feet were bare, cut up from walking. "How old are you?" Thomas asked, his voice softer now. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was so small he almost missed it. 15. Thomas exhaled slowly. He looked back toward the wagon, then down at the girl again. She still hadn't turned to face him. "Where are the men who were with you?" he asked carefully. "In the creek." Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. He stepped past her, moving upstream, his boots splashing through the shallow water. It didn't take long to find them. 3 men face down in the water, their bodies caught against the rocks. Blood had turned the creek rust-colored in places, already fading downstream. 2 of them had been shot in the back. The third had his throat cut, clean and deep. Thomas stood there for a long moment, the water moving around his boots, the sun pressing down on his neck. Then he turned and walked back to the girl. She was still sitting on the rock, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at nothing. "Did you do this?" Thomas asked. She nodded once. "All 3. Another nod. Thomas crouched down a few feet from her, resting the rifle across his knees. "You got a name?" "Ellie." "Ellie what?" She didn't answer. "All right," Thomas said quietly, "Ellie's enough." He studied her face, pale, hollow-eyed, a bruise along her jaw that was already turning yellow at the edges. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Or maybe she'd been asleep the whole time, and this was the first moment she'd woken up. "Those men your kin?" Thomas asked. Ellie's jaw tightened. "One of them was my father." Thomas let that sit between them for a moment. Then he asked, "And the others?" Her voice cracked, just barely. "His friends." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, a sickness turning in his gut. When he opened them again, Ellie was looking at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark, flat, empty of anything except exhaustion. "You gonna turn me in?" she asked. Thomas stood slowly, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. He looked down at the girl, then back at the creek where the bodies lay. "No," he said, "I'm not." Ellie blinked, confused. "Why not?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He walked over to his mare, untied a canteen from the saddle, and brought it back to her. He held it out. "Because some men don't deserve a burial," he said, "and some debts don't need the law to settle them." Ellie stared at the canteen like she didn't know what to do with it. Finally, she took it, unscrewed the cap, and drank. Water spilled down her chin. She didn't wipe it away. Thomas turned and started walking back toward the wagon. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. "We'll get you cleaned up, then we'll figure out what comes next." Ellie didn't move at first. She sat there on the rock, the canteen in her lap, watching him walk away. Then slowly she stood and followed. The sun was high now, burning through the cottonwood leaves, casting broken shadows across the ground. Behind them, the creek kept moving, carrying the blood downstream, washing it away like it had never been there at all. Thomas didn't take her to his house right away. He brought her to the barn instead, a long structure with high rafters and the smell of hay and leather. It was cooler inside, quieter. He led her to a wooden bench near the tack room and told her to sit. She did, without a word, her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting for punishment. Thomas fetched a bucket of water from the pump outside, a clean rag, and a bar of soap. He set them down beside her. "Wash up," he said. "I'll find you something to wear." He left her there and walked back to the house, his mind turning over what he'd just seen. 3 dead men, a girl with blood on her hands and bruises on her skin, a wagon full of nothing but rot and shame. He didn't know what the law would call it, but he knew what he'd call it. Justice. Inside the house, Thomas pulled a shirt and a pair of old trousers from a trunk in the back room, clothes that had belonged to his son years ago before the fever took him. He folded them carefully and carried them back to the barn. Ellie was still sitting on the bench, the rag in her hands, but she hadn't touched the water. She was staring at the floor, her face blank. Thomas set the clothes down beside her. "These'll be too big, but they're clean. You can roll the sleeves." She didn't look up. Thomas crouched down in front of her, his voice low. "Ellie, you hear me?" She nodded, barely. "I need you to understand something," Thomas said. "You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you. But if someone comes looking, if the law comes, I need to know what happened, all of it." Ellie's hands tightened around the rag. Her voice came out hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a long time. "They sold me." Thomas felt the words hit him like a fist. He stayed still, waiting. "My father," Ellie continued, her voice shaking now, he'd bring his friends, tell me it was what I owed him, for feeding me, for keeping me." She swallowed hard. "When I turned 15, he started charging them." Thomas's jaw clenched, so hard his teeth ached. "I tried to run once," Ellie whispered. "He caught me, broke my arm, said next time he'd break both." She looked up at him then, her eyes wet but her face hard. "So I stopped trying to run, and I started planning." Thomas nodded slowly. "The rifle in the wagon, that was yours." "My father's. He kept it under the driver's bench. I waited till they were drunk, till they were too far gone to notice me moving." Her voice went flat again. "I shot the first one in his sleep. My father woke up, tried to grab me. I shot him too. The third one ran. I caught him at the creek." She paused, her breath hitching. "I cut his throat with my father's knife." Thomas exhaled slowly, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was steady. "You did what you had to." Ellie shook her head. "The law won't see it that way." "Maybe not," Thomas said, "but I do." He stood, picked up the bucket, and poured fresh water into a basin. "Now clean yourself up. You're not carrying their dirt anymore." Ellie finally moved. She dipped the rag into the water and began washing her hands, scrubbing hard, like she was trying to erase something deeper than blood. Thomas left her alone and walked outside, breathing in the dry air, the weight of it all pressing down on him. He thought about his son, about the fever that took him when he was just 12. He thought about the boy's mother, who died bringing him into the world. He thought about all the ways a person could be stolen from you, by sickness, by cruelty, by men who called themselves fathers but were nothing more than wolves in human skin. When he came back inside, Ellie was dressed in the oversized clothes, the sleeves rolled up, the trousers cinched tight with a piece of rope. She looked smaller somehow, younger. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. They walked to the house together, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. Inside, Thomas heated a pot of stew from the night before and set a bowl in front of her. She ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure it was real. Thomas sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. Ellie looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where do you want to go? You got family anywhere, anyone who'd take you in?" She shook her head. "No one." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Then you'll stay here, work the ranch if you're willing. I'll pay you fair, no question." Es asked. Ellie stared at him like he'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "Why?" "Because you deserve a chance," Thomas said simply, "and because I've got more land than I know what to do with and not enough hands to work it." Ellie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She just nodded once hard. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the empty fields. "One more thing," he said. "If anyone comes asking about those men, you let me do the talking. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He turned back to her, his face set. "Now finish your stew. Tomorrow we've got work to do." But even as he said it, Thomas could feel the weight of what was coming. Word traveled fast in the West, and dead men always had friends. It took 5 days. Thomas had known it wouldn't take long, but he'd hoped for more time. Time to let the girl settle, time to bury the dead quietly, time to prepare for what he knew was inevitable. He'd gone back to the creek the morning after he found Ellie and dragged the bodies into a shallow grave behind the cottonwood grove. No markers, no prayers, just dirt and stones. The wagon he'd burned, the mules he'd set loose, let them wander. Ellie had worked beside him those 5 days without complaint. She mucked stalls, mended fence line, carried water, split wood. She didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. Her hands spoke for her, steady, deliberate, grateful. Thomas watched her carefully, saw the way she startled at loud noises, the way she kept her back to walls, the way she never fully relaxed. But she was strong, stronger than most men he'd known. On the 5th day, the riders came. Thomas saw them from the porch, 3 men on horseback, coming up the long road toward his property. He recognized one of them immediately, Sheriff Harding, a broad-shouldered man with a gray mustache and a tin star pinned to his vest. The other 2 were strangers, rough-looking men with guns on their hips and hard eyes. Thomas stood slowly, his rifle leaning against the porch rail within arm's reach. He didn't pick it up yet, not yet. Ellie was inside, washing dishes. Thomas called to her through the open door. "Ellie, go to the back room, don't come out till I say." She appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Who is it?" "Just do as I say." She nodded and disappeared. The riders stopped at the edge of the yard, their horses snorting and stamping. Sheriff Harding dismounted first, his hand resting on his belt, not his gun. That was a good sign, for now. "Thomas," Harding said, nodding. "Sheriff," Thomas replied evenly. Harding glanced at the 2 men still on horseback, then back at Thomas. "Got a question for you. You seen a wagon come through here recently? Old canvas top, 2 mules." Thomas kept his face neutral. "Can't say I have. Why?" One of the other men spoke up, a lean, scarred man with a voice like gravel. "Because the men driving that wagon are missing, and the last anyone saw them, they were headed this direction." Thomas shrugged. "Lot of folks pass through, I don't keep track." The scarred man narrowed his eyes. "One of those men was my brother." "Sorry to hear that," Thomas said flatly. Harding stepped forward, his tone measured. "Thomas, I'm not here to cause trouble, but these men have a right to look for their kin, if you know something." I don't. The scarred man dismounted now, his boots hitting the dirt hard. You mind if we take a look around? Thomas's hand moved closer to the rifle. I do, actually. The third man, silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was cold, deliberate. We found the wagon, burned out 2 miles east of here. Found the grave, too. Thomas's jaw tightened. The scarred man stepped closer. So I'll ask you again, where's the girl? Thomas didn't answer. Harding held up a hand, his voice sharper now. Hold on, what girl? The scarred man ignored him, his eyes locked on Thomas. The girl who was with them, my brother's daughter, she's 15, brown hair thin, you seen her or not? Thomas stared at him, his mind racing. Daughter, this man thought Ellie was his niece. He thought she'd been taken. I haven't seen anyone, Thomas said. The scarred man's hand moved to his gun. You're lying. Harding stepped between them. That's enough. Thomas, if there's a girl here, I need to know if she's in danger. She's not, Thomas said quietly. The words hung in the air. Harding's face changed. So there is a girl. Thomas didn't answer. The scarred man's voice went low, dangerous. Bring her out, now. No. The third man drew his gun, leveling it at Thomas. Bring her out, or we'll burn this place down and find her ourselves. Thomas's hand closed around the rifle. He lifted it slowly, aiming it at the third man's chest. You can try. Harding's hand shot up. Everyone calm down. Thomas, lower the rifle. You too, Clint. Neither man moved. The sheriff turned to the scarred man. Elias, tell me the truth. What happened to your brother? Ayaz's face twisted. How the hell should I know? That's why we're here. Harding looked back at Thomas. And you know what happened. Thomas's voice was steady, cold. Your men, they got what they deserved. Elias lunged forward, but Harding caught him, shoving him back. Explain, now. Thomas lowered the rifle slightly, his eyes never leaving Elias. The girl you're looking for, she's not his brother's daughter, she's his victim. They all were, her father and his friends. He spat the word like poison. They used her, sold her, beat her when she tried to run. Elias went still. She killed them, Thomas continued, and I don't blame her. Harding exhaled slowly, his hand still on his gun. That true, Elias? Elias said nothing. The third man lowered his gun slightly, glancing at Elias. You didn't tell us that part. Because it's a lie, Elias growled. Thomas's voice cut through the air. Then bring the law, bring a judge. Let the girl tell her story. See how far your brother's reputation gets you. Elias' face went red. She's a murderer. She's a survivor, Thomas said, and she stays here. The standoff stretched, the air thick with tension. Harding looked between the men, his hands still on his belt. Finally, he spoke. Elias, get back on your horse. Sheriff. Now. Elias stared at Thomas for a long moment, hatred burning in his eyes. Then he turned and mounted his horse. The third man followed. Harding looked at Thomas one last time. This isn't over. I know, Thomas said. The three men rode off, dust rising behind them. Thomas stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching until they disappeared over the hill. Then he turned and called into the house. Ellie, it's all right, you can come out. But he knew it wasn't all right. Not yet. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat in the chair by the window, his rifle across his lap, watching the road. Ellie had gone to bed hours ago, but he could hear her moving in the back room, restless, haunted. Around midnight, she appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale in the moonlight. You should be asleep, Thomas said. So should you. He didn't argue. She walked over and sat on the floor beside his chair, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. They're coming back, aren't they? She asked quietly. Thomas nodded, probably. You should have let them take me. He looked down at her. No. I'm not worth dying for. Thomas set the rifle down and leaned forward, his voice firm. That's not for you to decide. Ellie stared at the floor, her hands twisting the blanket. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he spoke, his voice softer than before. I had a son once. His name was Daniel. He died when he was 12. Fever took him in 3 days. He paused, the memory pressing down on him. I wasn't there when it happened. I was out chasing a herd, trying to make enough money to keep the ranch running. By the time I got back, he was already in the ground. Ellie looked up at him, her eyes wide. I spent a long time blaming myself, Thomas continued, thinking about all the things I could have done different, all the time I wasted. He met her gaze. So when I see someone who's been hurt, someone who's got no one, yeah, I know you, maybe not your name or your story, but I know what it feels like to lose everything, and I know what it feels like to be saved. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. No one's ever. Her voice broke. She turned away, wiping her face with the blanket. Thomas reached down and rested a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Ellie, not while I'm breathing. She nodded, unable to speak. They sat like that for a long time, the silence between them comfortable now, the weight of the world just a little bit lighter. They came at dawn. Thomas woke to the sound of hoofbeats, the low rumble of men gathering at the edge of his property. He moved quickly, pulling on his boots, grabbing his rifle. Ellie was already awake, standing in the hallway, her face set. Stay inside, Thomas said. No. He turned to her, his voice sharp. Ellie. I'm not hiding anymore. Thomas stared at her, saw the determination in her eyes, and knew there was no use arguing. He nodded once. Stay behind me. They walked out onto the porch together. Elias was there, along with 5 other men, hired guns by the look of them. Sheriff Harding was there too, sitting on his horse at the back of the group, his face grim. Elias stepped forward, his hand on his gun. Last chance, Crane, hand her over. Thomas raised his rifle, aiming it at Elias' chest. Over my dead body. Elias smiled, cold and ugly. That can be arranged. Harding's voice rang out. That's enough. Elias, stand down, this is over. Elias turned on him. Stay out of this, Sheriff. I can't do that. Elias' face twisted with rage. You gonna arrest him? He's harboring a murderer. Harding dismounted slowly, his hand on his gun. Out to some folks in town, found out about your brother, found out what kind of man he really was. He looked at Ellie, and I believe her story. Elias' jaw clenched. You got no proof. I got enough, Harding said. Now get off this land before I arrest you for trespassing. The hired guns shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. One by one, they turned their horses and rode off. Elias stood alone now, his hand still on his gun. He looked at Thomas, then at Ellie, hatred burning in his eyes. This isn't over, he said. Thomas's voice was steady. Yes, it is. Elias stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and mounted his horse, riding off without another word. Harding stayed behind, his eyes on Thomas. You know he's not gonna let this go. I know, Thomas said. Harding nodded slowly. You need anything, you let me know. Appreciate it, Sheriff. Harding tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Thomas and Ellie standing alone on the porch. Ellie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It's really over. Thomas lowered his rifle. It's really over. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face now, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Epilogue. 2 years later, a stranger riding through the valley might have seen a girl working the fence line on the Crane Ranch, strong, steady, her face turned toward the sun. They might have seen an older man beside her, teaching her how to mend the posts, how to read the land, how to build something that lasts. They might have heard laughter carried on the wind, the sound of a life rebuilt from ash and blood and mercy. And if they asked in town who the girl was, they'd hear different stories. Some said she was Thomas Crane's daughter. Some said she was a drifter he'd taken in. Others said she was a ghost, a girl who died once and come back to life. But the truth was simpler than that. She was a survivor, and she was home.